C60 olive oil is a popular choice for people wanting to activate their full potential. Improved sleep, faster recovery, and more energy are just a few of the amazing comments received from our customers who take a spoonful a day. Make C60 oil a part of your daily routine and see what it can do for you. Activate your potential today at thec60company.com.
There was a story which really encapsulates what goes on behind the scenes that we're not told about. And the headline is this: Iraqi Prime Minister claims Trump threatened false flag attacks on protesters if he didn't accept oil deal. These are claims by the Iraqi Prime Minister here. But what he's describing is something that is happening all the time. We've seen the propaganda from all sides this week in relation to Iran and America. But what we don't see is where the real deal is. And I'll just go through this story and you'll see what I mean. Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi claims that in the build-up to Qasem Soleimani's assassination, President Trump threatened to carry out false flag murders of Iraqi protesters that would then be blamed on Abdul Mahdi unless he agreed to hand over 50% of the country's oil revenue. According to the Strategic Culture Foundation's Federico Perasini, Abdul Mahdi was angry about how the US had failed to complete the rebuilding of Iraq's infrastructure and electricity grid projects unless they were promised 50% of oil revenues, which Abdul Mahdi refused. Abdul Mahdi then gave a speech to the Iraqi parliament in which he explained that the main reason behind his resignation was Trump pressuring him not to make a deal with the Chinese and threats that the US would engage in false flag shootings of protesters and security forces. Now, this is a translated portion of Abdul Mahdi's speech. He said, "This is why I visited China and signed an important agreement with them to undertake the construction instead. Upon my return, Trump called me and asked me to reject this agreement. When I refused, he threatened to unleash huge demonstrations against me that would end my premiership. Huge demonstrations against me duly materialized, and Trump called again to threaten that if I did not comply with his demands, then he would have Marine snipers on tall buildings target protesters and security personnel alike in order to pressure me. I refused again and handed in my resignation. To this day, the Americans insist on us rescinding our deal with the Chinese. After this, our Minister of Defense publicly stated that a third party was targeting both protesters and security personnel alike, just as Trump had threatened he would do. I received a new call from Trump threatening to kill both me and the Minister of Defense if we kept on talking about his third party." Shortly after, General Soleimani was assassinated. Abdul Mahdi claims that he was supposed to meet Soleimani that very morning, suggesting that he too may have been a target of the drone strike. I suppose I was supposed to meet Soleimani later in the morning. When he was killed, he came to deliver a message from Iran in response to the message we had delivered to the Iranians from the Saudis, um, Abdul Mahdi said. Now, um, what was threatened there with snipers picking off protesters to be blamed on the Iraqi Prime Minister is what happened in Ukraine, of course. And you had protesters in Kiev, and someone started firing, and it was blamed on the leader of Ukraine. And from that point, the momentum of opposition to the leader, Yanukovych, reached the point where he fled to Russia. And the coup, which was an American coup on Ukraine, unfolded. So, what Abdul Mahdi is describing is something that goes on all the time in the background, where leaders who are acting at odds with the United States and Israel are threatened or forced out by actions taken by the United States administration. And those people supporting Trump in the alternative media need to appreciate that he is no different to all the others. He just tells that constituency, which he needs to get re-elected, what it wants to hear. But in the background, Trump is just like all the others. And if Trump did not need to keep that constituency happy that overwhelmingly voted for him on the basis of his claim that he would not get involved in wars against countries like Iran and would pull the troops out of Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, if he didn't have that electoral pressure in a presidential election year that could be decimated by him doing what he said he wouldn't do, which was war with countries like Iran, if that electoral pressure wasn't there, there'd be a war with Iran by now. It's only his knowledge of the electoral consequences that are holding back. And if he wins a second term, who knows? When he doesn't have to win a third term because he can't have one. So that is a story. It was written by Paul Joseph Watson on the Alex Jones site, and which is fair to them because they posted it, and it shows a different angle on Trump than the one that Infowars has basically been promoting as supporters of Trump. So fair dues to that. But it is a story that really does capture what really goes on in the shadows, and B, that Trump is not the great savior that so many think that he is. The writer of the original story Pericini um, explains that the underlying reason for the assassination of Soleimani was the US lashing out at a world turning its back on the unipolar world order in favor of the emerging multipolar, and the threat posed by China and Russia to the US dollar maintaining its status as the world reserve currency and the only currency in which oil can be traded. Um, he said Soleimani's death is the result of a convergence of US and Israeli interests, that's for sure. With no other way of halting Eurasian integration, Washington can only throw the region into chaos by targeting countries like Iran, Iraq, and Syria that are central to the Eurasian project. And I've written about this Eurasian project for a long time, and it is US Israel control of Eurasia, this massive landmass from Europe to China and Russia down into the Middle East. And this is where all these countries, if you look at the countries that are being targeted through demonization or targeted militarily, then they're all in this landmass of Eurasia, which the former national security advisor to President Jimmy Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is he's died now, but a massive insider of this cult. He wrote in the late 90s that if you want to control the world, you need to control Eurasia. And that's massively central to what this is all about. But there are other pressures pushing the other way, and if you're going to control Eurasia, then you have to control China and Russia, that are the two massively major powers in that landmass outside of Europe. And indeed, they're the major powers outside of Europe if they combine, or including Europe rather, if they combine. And this then starts to fit with what I've been saying for a long time, which is the plan ultimately is to try to trigger some kind of conflict with Russia and China that would bring about that control of Eurasia. But that's a very indicative story of how it all works away from the public eye. Another part of this subject is the blatant nonsense that comes out of the mouths of American presidents, Trump in this case, about wanting to spread American values and all that stuff. And what it was claimed in terms of the invasion of Iraq based on a lie was that they were going there to free the people from Saddam Hussein and to introduce democracy. And of course, democracy is an absolute scam and smokescreen. The idea is you make democracy and freedom interchangeable words, and if you are able to vote every 4 or 5 years to apparently select the government or the leader, then you are free. But if the leader options are controlled by the same force, or leaders that come to power that won't play ball with you are then targeted and removed by whatever means, then where does democracy and freedom interact? It doesn't. And when you have politicians who can tell you what they're going to do and not going to do in an election campaign and then get elected on that and then do the opposite, what's the point of an election campaign? When just what happens is the people are lied to get the votes, and then once the votes are secured, then it's business as usual. And the idea that America and Britain invaded Iraq to bring democracy stroke freedom is utter nonsense. And we have a story here that kind of confirms that. US empire's passion for Iraqi democracy magically disappears. Following a vote by the Iraqi parliament to remove foreign troops from the nation, the US President Donald Trump threatened to destroy Iraq's economy in retaliation and to refuse to leave unless an expensive military base worth billions of dollars was paid for. And of course, the military base worth billions of dollars was built by the American government and military for American interest purposes. If they do ask us to leave, if we don't do it in a friendly basis, Trump told a press conference, we will charge them sanctions like they've never seen before, ever. I mean, this is narcissist, barely one-dimensional Trump. Everything that he threatens people with is always the biggest, the most powerful, the most, for them, catastrophic response that anyone's ever seen. And Trump said it'll make Iranian sanctions look somewhat tame. If there's any hostility, that they do anything we think is inappropriate, we are going to put sanctions on Iraq, very big sanctions on Iraq. We have a very extraordinarily expensive airbase there. It cost billions of dollars to build, long before my time, Trump said. We're not leaving unless they pay us back. This is the same Donald Trump who, throughout his election campaign in 2016, was saying that he would bring the troops out of the Middle East, and of course that included Iraq. Now he has the opportunity, because the Iraqi parliament has said, we want you out. And he's saying, no, we ain't going. We ain't going until you pay us for this base, which we built for our own interests. And I really do hope that Trump supporters would just look at what is done rather than what he said, and therefore realize that he's just another front man, just like all the rest.